Okay, so yes, my talk today is going to be about fitness landscapes and problem features. This is a an area of optimization research that I've been interested in for a long time, and I'm going to sort of selfishly talk about a few things that I've worked on, but try and give a little bit of an overview of the area as well. So really, I want to just try and do these three things. I'll give you a bit of an overview of what we mean by fitness landscapes and why anybody might be interested in doing research in this area. And then I'll talk about, yeah, a few selected techniques that I've worked on with some very bright students over the years. That can be useful, I think, for doing landscape analysis. And I also feel like, I mean, this is an area of research that's active and interesting, lots of ideas floating around and lots of work has been done, but still, I think lots of open areas and challenges to doing future work. So I'll try and poke a few holes at the end and at least talk about where I think there might be work still to do. And yes, that's kind of the plan. So, um, yeah, what is this thing, a landscape? Well, really, we're talking about the search space of an optimization problem, um, and the objective function that comes with that optimization problem. So the landscape is, we can define this in terms of the search space, some kind of notion of neighborhood in the search space, um, uh, and so yeah, some kind of neighborhood function, perhaps a mapping, and the fitness function or the objective function, if you like. That's it. So a landscape for a discrete problem is a graph. And so then if the problem is not too big, then, well, the problem is finite if it's a graph. And in principle, if it's not too big, we could even enumerate the entire search space and know, I guess, everything there is to know in terms of what are the candidate solutions to the problem and what is the objective function for those solutions. So, for example, I have this 3-bit one max problem here where a candidate solution is a 3-bit bit string, and the fitness function is the number of ones in the bit string. And so the best you can do is to get a fitness of 3 where you have 3 ones. Um, and the search space is a graph kind of like this. So I um, I got AI to draw this picture, and it did a pretty good job where we have nodes being the solutions and vertices, sorry, edges being the connections between solutions. Your uh, if the way you move through the space is to apply a 1-bit flip. So two nodes are connected. If the number of bits to get from one to the other, you just need to flip a single bit. Unfortunately, this AI generated figure is not quite correct, because it made a couple of mistakes, whichever AI I used to generate this. There's an incorrect edge there with the red and a missing edge with the green. But I mean, still does a kind of amazing job, to be honest, based on a couple of prompts. So I gave the AI 9 out of 10. But anyway, this is an example of a landscape in the discrete case. And well, you can go from this and start talking about the structure, the topology or the topography of a landscape. and think about properties like a local optimum. What does that mean in terms of um, the nodes in the graph and your neighboring nodes? You can define precisely what a local optimum is, whether it's unique or not, what a basin of attraction might mean, and all of these sorts of things. And these kind of properties have been studied by lots of people. Complete enumeration would give us this full description of the landscape, and you could do that in some cases. Just a couple of selected references through the slides. If you could fully enumerate the landscape, then you could do all sorts of, you could count the number of local optima, for example, and I suppose extract information from the landscape that way. Um, Usually, okay, you'd be doing this analysis with respect to a certain class of problems, perhaps, maybe graph coloring problems or something, and also with respect to specific operators, because, yeah, it's really important to kind of connect properties like local optimum to the actual move operator that you might consider or your algorithm might implement when you do search. Yes. So why would someone care about the structure of the landscape? Um, well, I think there's two general things that could motivate people in this area. You could think about problem difficulty, because, well, I suppose it's quite a general thing in optimization that we care about which algorithms perform well for which types of problems, um, so that we can use the right algorithm or use an algorithm that's likely to give us good results for a given problem. But yeah, how do you relate um, the performance of an algorithm or the mechanisms of an algorithm to the problem to be able to say something about this mapping between problems and algorithms and algorithm performance? So that starts off a lot of work in along lines like automated algorithm selection, for example, where we try and construct pipelines that can perhaps do some analysis of the problem and then from that decide which algorithm or which algorithms to run. Maybe that can be even done dynamically. So that's the first point. And then the second point is a little bit more abstract, I guess, scientific, less engineering, but thinking about problem complexity, as in how complicated a landscape is. Are there ways to think about that and measure that and say something about the complexity of an optimization problem in an algorithm independent way? And what types of problem instances does the real world present us with? Are they, and if there are complicated ones there, what are the mechanisms that make the problem complex? For example, yes, some work has been done looking at phase transitions um, in certain combinatorial optimization problems, for example. So they're general motivations for landscape analysis, I think. For continuous landscapes, so this is my work's all been about continuous landscapes, really. So in a continuous optimization problem, you have the same kind of definition as for discrete, but now the notion of neighborhood is going to follow from some notion of distance in this continuous space. Search space is infinite, and we can think about topological or geometric properties of continuous landscapes. People have been doing this, in fact, for a long time, right? So if we know something about the function, if we know its mathematical form and we can differentiate it, then we can say things about critical points and gradient and convexity and so on. We get strong intuition from pictures like this, where we're looking at the contours of a two-dimensional continuous optimization problem. It maybe helps us to think about structure and think about how algorithms behave. But I'm never quite sure whether this 2D, 3D intuition actually helps or harms us when we're trying to think about how an algorithm might behave in a 50-dimensional landscape or a 100 or I don't know, a million-dimensional landscape. So that's something to sort of keep in mind, I guess. All right. So yeah, it's possible that you might enumerate small problems to do analysis, but a lot of fitness landscape analysis is about doing sampling, all right? Because we assume the problem search space is large or maybe infinite, and so if we're going to try and learn something about this landscape, it's going to be via data, right? So we might sample at random solutions from the search space and then evaluate the objective function. And this will give us some kind of data set where we have candidate solutions xj and fitness values f of xj. And then we have this data set, and now we can maybe do some analysis of that. So yes, we're approximating or trying to do analysis based on limited information about the landscape. So straight away, this means that a lot of landscape analysis is quite focused along the lines of experimental algorithmics. So we're sort of studying algorithms and studying problems, but from the point of view of sampling data, like somebody might do in some other scientific domain. But the thing we're studying here is problem instances or algorithm instances. So experimental factors become really important. There's also this issue of how we choose the data how we create the sample. So a lot of the data set here might look very much like a supervised machine learning problem, a regression problem, but the difference, I guess, to normal standard machine learning is that here we choose the X data that we want to be labeled or we want to evaluate. So there are all these sort of elements of how do we do that. So experimental design methodologies come in here and have something to say. Probably we need a boundary constraint for continuous optimization problems as well, but that's usually not something that it's quite often a soft boundary constraint that we impose just to keep a handle on our experiment, right? So I mostly think about unconstrained continuous problems, but of course you could think about continuous constrained problems as well, where you have hard constraints or non-trivial constraints. But I won't talk about constraints today. All right, so fitness landscape analysis. This area kind of proceeds on this basis, and so many people have proposed to use all different kinds of techniques to try and analyze the data that we sample from a landscape. Um, and you might say, yeah, we construct features or we calculate features of landscapes, try and do that from the data. ELA stands for exploratory landscape analysis. So this is this whole sort of thread of work where people have done this kind of thing. For example, you might calculate simple statistics like a correlation coefficient. Take a sample of points, evaluate the fitness, and also calculate their distance to the global optimum, and then calculate the correlation coefficient. Gives you some indication of what the landscape looks like as you walk away from the global optimum, on average. Or you might take your data and do a linear regression model, and then look at the R squared for the linear regression model to get some indication of slope, goodness of fit. So there are many other features that people have proposed, hundreds, in fact. And then, given feature calculations for problem instances, we might then do things like compare problems by looking at the differences between their feature values. And then maybe we can use this data to also drive algorithm selection. So take this feature data that we've calculated on problems and use that as the inputs to a machine learning model, to a classifier, or a regression model that might predict something like what's going to be the expected runtime for an algorithm to achieve a certain performance on this problem if we have these types of feature values. So lots of stuff in this space. Landscape features, and they've been shown to do that, they can do this kind of stuff at least to some success. Landscape features typically are about summarizing the data, because this data is coming from a high dimensional space typically. And so if you're going to take high dimensional data and summarize it in a one number, then you're going to expect that you will lose a lot of information in that process. So I stole this picture from somewhere on the internet, but it's widely used in statistics as an example of a whole lot of data sets that all have the same correlation coefficient and the same linear R. So, you have this kind of situation where features can be losing a lot of information. So we shouldn't expect a really that the power of a feature to discriminate between different optimization landscapes might be somewhat limited. Also, the features we have, well, of course, they each have their own hyperparameters and built-in assumptions, and these can impact the experimental results and the conclusions that we draw from our landscape analysis. So that's something we also need to keep in mind. But it's actually quite interesting to sometimes look at individual instances. So this is almost, I guess, hasn't been too much of the focus in landscape analysis. But for example, these are some very old pictures here from a paper where I was looking at the loss landscapes of neural networks. And in this case, you have a situation where we set up the network so that we know the global optimum, and we calculate, so we can calculate the fitness distance correlation. And these plots show the actual data that you have when you calculate the fitness values and the distance from the global optimum, but you plot all of those things rather than summarize with a correlation coefficient. So you can see that, you get um, you get quite a variety of structure that you can see from these scatter plots. All right. So for example, um, the you can see these levels, horizontal lines sort of appearing, which tells you that there are a lot of solutions that have a very similar fitness value, regardless of the distance to the global optimum. So this is perhaps an indication of what's called neutrality, so lots of sort of flat areas on the landscape. So there's interesting things to see in there. Um, and then this is a different example where, again, it's fitness distance correlation, but on the left and the right, you're supposed to be looking at the same problem. You are looking at the same problem instance, but the issue here is that with fitness distance correlation, um, the original intention of that is that you know the global optimum, so you can calculate these distances. Well, obviously you wouldn't know the global optimum in any in many interesting problems. Um, so in this case, people have sometimes just said, all right, we'll just take the best solution from our sample and use that as a proxy for the global optimum, which is obviously unlikely to be the same. Otherwise, you already found the global optimum. But you can see comparing the left and the right that you get a hugely different picture um, because of that choice. And that's sort of a hyperparameter modeling choice of the algorithm, sorry, of the feature that you're using here. So there are things to think about when calculating features. Um, all right. So then you might ask, well, what makes a good feature? I'm not sure I know, actually. Um, Many landscape features that people use, you could say, are not designed specifically with optimization problems in mind. So people have looked at the data and said, okay, there are many things that are applicable here. We can calculate statistics and so on. You can go ahead and do that. And so that's a lot of what has been done is sort of looking like that. And why not? That's easy to do and it can work. Um, Other features people had proposed originally in discrete for discrete landscapes. And then other people, like myself, looked at them and said, maybe we can adapt those to make them useful for a continuous landscape. That's also something that's possible. So yeah, this is a lot of the stuff that's happened in the field, but I want to talk about three specific examples of techniques that were proposed to do landscape analysis, and yes, by myself and students. And I think these are interesting because at least they're designed specifically with the um, objective of trying to analyze a continuous landscape, rather than being something more general. They're quite meant to be a bit more specific. So we'll have a look at those. Um, and I'll just yeah give you the idea of what's going on. All right, so the first feature is this thing we call length scale from Rachel Morgan's PhD work, and the intuition with this is pretty simple. It's the idea is just that we thought it's probably important when you're analyzing an algorithm or thinking about a landscape. It's probably important to consider if I take a step from some solution xi to another one xj, what is the change in fitness value that I observe when I take that step? So it's sort of defined here as the absolute difference in f values divided by the distance between the two solutions. And this is quite similar to the difference quotient and the if you were to look for the maximum of this, you would have what's called the Lipschitz constant in mathematical optimization. Um, but the idea we have here is that we'd like to, it might be useful to analyze this quantity across a sample of points, right? So usually in landscape analysis, we're thinking about the black box optimization case where we don't really want to assume that we know anything about the optimization problem, except that we have the ability to evaluate the objective function for candidate solutions. We don't know that the problem is differentiable. We don't have access necessarily to the objective function, except we can evaluate solutions. So it's sort of zeroth order information. Um, yes, so this is length scale. If you know the objective function, you could write down an expression and do some math. But in general, we were thinking about the sampling approach. Um, for this. And we know some things about the properties of length scale, that it's invariant to some translations of the transformations of the objective function, like translation and rotation. It's not invariant to scaling because it looks at the f values. Um, but yes, this is kind of how it goes for length scale. So for example, this is a simple example where we have um, a kind of toy one-dimensional fitness function on the left, which is constructed to try and have different structure in it. And then what we do is enumerate, do a whole sweep of values along the x-axis and get many points, and then we evaluate the objective function, and we calculate those length scale values pairwise over the whole data set. And because this problem is one-dimensional, we can do a visualization of that whole data set, if you like, on the right here with the xi and the xj being pairs of points from the sample, and then the color is showing you the length scale value. So you kind of see that in a way it's a transformation of the function that where you can see that there's this rich structure or information that's to some extent being captured by the length scale values. And yeah, for example, the flat areas of the landscape give you these black squares because um, there's no change in fitness if you move from one place on the flat to another place on the flat area, um, so on. So yes, and because we're in the age of AI, and hopefully I can actually do this week, if I change my share, I'll show you the web browser. Maybe can somebody just confirm that you can see that okay?
Yes, we can see
Great.
that.
Excellent. All right. So, um, yeah, okay. It's a little bit big because I'm just on one screen now. But yeah, so what I thought, why don't I need more nice pictures to show in my talk today. So why don't I just vibe code a demo for you of this length scale thing that we came up with years ago. So I go to an AI and I point it to the paper and I say, do a web demo for me. And in one or two prompts, I have JavaScript code working in a HTML file that does this for us. All right, which is kind of incredible. Um, well, I think it is incredible. But yeah, so this is what you kind of see. You have a function on the left hand side, and then the length scale thing that I just showed you, like this matrix is in the middle, showing all the values. And then it's also added in the distribution for us of the length scale values on the right hand side. And I can go change the function that we're looking at, and of course the demo. I mean, I checked the code. It does seem to look correct. So we can get a variety of different um, pictures just to get a feel, just to see what this length scale thing produces for different functions. That's kind of nice, I think. Yes. So there we go. Um, I'll pop back to the slides. All right. Yeah. So as you kind of already saw, this is good. It's good to get all these length scale values from a sample of data, and you can look at them directly in a 1D problem. But for more than that, you might, of course, have to do some kind of summarizing of the data. One thing you could do is look at the distribution of the length scale values, and then have a look at that picture, calculate values of it. And of course, you might want to summarize even more. So, for example, you might calculate the entropy of your length scale distribution or some other statistic, and then try and use that to compare problems, for example. So these graphs show length scale entropy values for the BBOB problem set. So that's the top left figure, and then on the right of that, there's a different feature called information stability, which was previously proposed, and you kind of see that they have a similar looking profile, these two features, um, and their the variance on the estimation is pretty small, and it seems like we're at least getting different values for different problems. Whereas fitness distance correlation on the bottom is clearly giving us highly variable estimates, and a lot of the functions have pretty similar values. So maybe it's of limited use compared to the features on top, we could say. Um, all right, so I don't want to run out of time. Second example feature of for landscape analysis, or this sort of idea, was this thing called non-convexity ratio. So our idea here, this was joint work with Kenichi Tamura, and yeah, the idea was to use this midpoint test for convexity, which you can do based on, samples, pairs of points, and you do that calculation, and the answer is either yes or no. Is the left-hand side greater than or equal to the right-hand side? So you can think of this as a binary transformation, or filtering of the function. And so we said, okay, this leads to um, this thing called non-convexity ratio, which is really just saying if you do lots of tests on your function, on your optimization problem landscape, what fraction of pairs of points will satisfy this test from all possible pairs? You don't have all possible pairs, but if you do a reasonable sample, you get a good Monte Carlo estimate of this of what this value should be. Okay, and again, for example, some four test functions on the left-hand side, and then on the right-hand side, the red and blue are showing you where the test is. I think where red means we got a positive convexity test and blue means we got a negative one. So you see that, the oscillations in the functions are being picked up by the by this non-convexity test that we're calculating. Summarizing it as, yes, we turn it into a ratio, but you can also summarize as a distribution, and so on. We also did a localized version of this where you might define a distance, uh, sort of like a radius of interest around some local area on the landscape and apply this idea. Um, all right, and super quickly, um, I did the same thing because I couldn't resist. I had to vibe code this one as well, um, which worked pretty well. Um, oops. So again, you see you have the function on the left. It's showing you these test results in the middle and some kind of distribution on the right. Um, and I can change the number of points in the sample. You can sort of see similar things happening to the picture in my slides. But it's pretty cool that you can just vibe code up these kinds of things. I think I also have two-dimensional functions in here as well, um, which all just magically happens thanks to AI vibe coding. Sorry if anybody's morally opposed to vibe coding, but it's pretty interesting that you can revisit old papers and build demos with very little effort. Um, at least I think that's quite good. Okay. So yes, so this is this non-convexity ratio feature, and then finally, this we have this idea that it might be good to go the machine learning way and use a regression model to actually model the landscape, something like a surrogate. So for this we chose Gaussian processes, and I mean this is just a picture of a GP if people are not familiar, but Gaussian processes are a flexible non-parametric regression model that is widely used in machine learning, and they're also used in Bayesian optimization as the driving surrogate model, which you then use to actually drive the search process inside Bayesian optimization. But so we're not trying to optimize here, we're just using this as a surrogate model of the landscape and then trying to say something about the landscape via the properties of the surrogate model, you could say. Um, What do I mean exactly? So if you take a sample of data points from your problem, then you can train a Gaussian process and fit them, and then you have your surrogate model. Um, and a, if you have a sample of n data points, a trained GP defines an n-dimensional Gaussian distribution. So if we're interested in comparing landscapes, comparing problems, then the idea here is, okay, if we have two problems, A and B, let's fit a Gaussian process to each one of them. And based on the sample of X values, now we have two n-dimensional Gaussian distributions. And from this, we can calculate a distance between these problems in terms of the KL divergence or a symmetric version of the KL divergence between the two distributions that come from the trained GP models, which I think is sort of, yeah, was the main idea with this. So then what you get out of that is a whole lot of distance values, and you can visualize them directly in a heat map to see this is on the BBOB problems and different instances of those 24 problems. And you kind of see similarity in grey, that some problems seem more similar to each other than others. Um, you could also visualize these distance values with a dendrogram, or you could apply dimensionality reduction. In the top right, it's TSNE, I think, or you could use PCA as well to try and understand the relationship between the problems in terms of their distance between each other, according to this GP model. So people do the same sort of thing with other features for landscapes. The idea here was maybe the GP is more powerful and able to capture better, um, somehow capture better the relationship between problem instances. Um, so that kind of leads nicely into some of the challenges of if you want to do research in this area, it's fun, but here are some things you might want to think about. It's although I I can sort of see the advantages of these landscape, these specific features that I've talked about. Um, it's quite difficult for me to show experimental results, I think, that are convincing in terms of saying these are better landscape features than some other features that you might like. Because the experimental setup has so many moving parts. And one of the important things is that we kind of lack a ground truth a lot of the time. How similar are these problems, and what is this similarity that we'd hope to recover by using features? Sometimes it's difficult to know that. Um, if we find a relationship, maybe in terms of algorithm performance, that might be okay. But it's a correlation. It might not be unique. Um, Using machine learning and statistical techniques, a lot of people do a lot of this stuff, and it opens up interesting directions, but it makes the experimental methodology complex. So I think it's important to consider hyperparameters and assumptions. There's a lot of work to be done there, I think, to improve this area of research and well, extend it, expand it. Um, when people are focused on using landscape analysis to drive algorithm selection and configuration, then the situation becomes more complex because we have maybe external data sources like labels for problems, algorithm performance data, and then there are extra moving parts to account for in the in the experiments. And then in the end, if the performance is good, you might wonder, is it because of the features or is it just because there was a really good machine learning model that was able to come up with a great classification performance? That can be a little bit tricky to distinguish. So, yeah, there are some issues here that I think are open to ideas. One possibility, I think, is to um, control more the problem sets that we analyze by constructing problems where we have a known relationship that we sort of smoothly vary and try and get a bit more insight from that. So this is, for example, some pictures from a paper that Andreas and I had in Gecko 24, varying, even just transforming the simple quadratic function by shifting it left and right um, gives you very different the sort of resulting effect on feature values is very different depending on the features that you use. And these are just two examples on the other two plots here. But I think there's plenty of work that could be done in this direction. And so it becomes a lot about um, trying to falsify and break things and doing truth recovery experiments. It's not about generating best performance or anything. It's about thinking about what might be going wrong and considering multiple factors, that kind of stuff. So there is some work in this space. Here's a few papers that have kind of more along these lines. Not an exhaustive list, just some examples. Um, okay, so I think I'm already out of time. It's just summarizing things that I already said. So I think it's an interesting area, and hopefully that gives you a bit of a taste of what's going on in landscape analysis. And thanks for listening.